Greetings, everybody. Welcome to Plato's Thursday, the best way to spend your Thursday. By tuning in this week, your Thursday is approaching the purity of the perfect form of Thursday. So says Plato. I'm your host, Josh, and this is my co-host, Joseph. In today's episode, we ask, does porn have any positive place in society? Should it even be legal? And after that, we'll discuss human connection in the year 2023. Is romance dead? Are things better or worse today than they were before? So Joseph, let's start with your perspective on porn in society.
Well, Josh, I think porn has no positive place in society. It's, I think, a net negative for our society. It's highly addictive. It melts the mind. I know that in neuroscience, there's some data that shows that it can like physically change your brain. I didn't really bother to look into that just because I'm not a neuroscientist, and if I looked at some charts or whatever, or some studies, I'd probably wouldn't have the wherewithal to really be able to fully dissect it. But I'm just willing to honestly just take their word for it because it makes sense. You know, our brain is what generates our consciousness, and there's no denying that addictions change your brain, change the way they work, and it just destroys human connection. Now, funny enough, this might surprise you because I've done a bit of a 180 on this. I don't think it should be illegal, but I do think it should be highly, highly regulated. And there should be a lot of laws put in place to make it. So here's one that we had talked privately about adding like all your info into the whatever porn site that you are trying to view porn at, and you have to put all of your info, including like your driver's license number, so they can verify your age. And I understand they're gonna say, "Oh, well, I don't want my information on this website." Well, that's what you got to do. Sorry, it's kind of like, well, it's legal. You just have to prove. You have to show your ID online, and if you don't want to take that risk because you don't want that, then you're not watching porn. But it's not technically illegal. It's just there is no way even a libertarian could argue that, oh, you have some kind of either constitutional or just moral right, or it's American to be able to watch these videos without having to prove how old you are, prove that you are who prove that you're whatever. And so I would be for that, and I would also be for the porn industry being under much more scrutiny on how people are treated ethically, because there have been a lot of issues with like sex trafficking and things like that, and other really immoral behavior. And I would just put some laws in place to make it so that just couldn't happen. So that's really where I am at. But on a moral level, I'm really against it. What's your thoughts?
You know, so we talked about this earlier, and I didn't agree with everything you had to say before, but what you just said, I find a very difficult time disagreeing with or finding anything that I don't like in it. I do think that giving your driver's license information to a random website is a little bit on the unsafe side. However, preventing minors from being able to access that stuff is very important. Right now, it's all you have to do on most of these websites is just click, oh yes, I'm over 18, which is not a deterrent in any way. Like especially for children who don't.
You may as well not even have it.
Yeah, especially for children.
You may as well not even have it.
It's very true. You know, for children who don't care about the rules anyway, you know, I mean, if they're going to be going to a site like that, they're going to be clicking that button. So it really is laughable to think that that's even something people do and expect to work. Putting in your driver's license, man, that I think would be mostly fine. The only real concern is identity theft. I don't know exactly what the risk there is, but I'd say it would be for the greater good that restriction be put into place. We already have, you already have to have your driver's license checked before buying alcohol or marijuana. I don't think it would be outlandish at all. And regarding the unethical treatment of people in the porn industry. That's also a very good point. So yeah, it's interesting. I kind of expected yeah, more of an argument like what we had earlier, but I think we're very much on the same page at this point. My thing is, I don't necessarily think that it has no value whatsoever. I think that it's only truly bad when it becomes an actual addiction. It's its addictive potential. In the same way that alcohol has strongly addictive potential, but it isn't bad in moderation. But it does. Alcohol can change your brain. Porn can change your brain. Meditating can change your brain. The brain is remarkably plastic, and something we have to consider in the modern world, I think, is just we're living in a time with supernormal stimulus. We can get any kind of stimulation we want relatively easily, and it has a weird effect on our psychology that we need to be mindful of.
Okay, well, that might be something interesting to dissect. So it's only immoral if, or it's only so, like, I don't think it's only bad if it's addictive. I think that first of all, in a way, it's more immoral if you're in a relationship because it's really dehumanizing to your partner, especially if
Agreed.
you're married. If you're single, then yeah, maybe not as much. But it's almost a form of cheating, really. If you're in a relationship and you're watching porn, I would argue that that's essentially a form of cheating.
I would agree with that.
And yeah, it's just gross too. It's just so if it's worse if you're in a serious relationship, especially if you're married and especially if you have kids. It's like if you're doing stuff like that, then it's not right. But if something's wrong, it's wrong. And I think if you are watching pornography, it is such a dehumanizing thing. I mean, like, it's really gross if you think about it. Just like conceptually, you're just watching two people have sex with each other, or other things. And even if it's not like dark web stuff, which that exists, but that's fringe. But even the more mainstream stuff, it's you're reducing humans down to just their parts, and you're not seeing them as people with souls. You're seeing them as it's a very animalistic kind of like it's kind of an animalistic thing. I don't know. I think it's immoral, honestly. Even if you're not addicted to it, I think it's almost like anything. It's not maybe the best counter example, but if you're not addicted to shoplifting, that doesn't mean that if you do it one time, it's not wrong. It's like even if you're like I'm not addicted to it, I just watch porn once or twice a week. It's like I would argue it's a moral flaw. I think it's a moral flaw.
See, I don't see it quite that way, but I agree with a lot of the sentiment. I would completely agree with you that it's a form of cheating if you're in a relationship. That's disgusting. And I've somewhat been on the other end of that before, and it feels absolutely horrible. Um, and I don't totally agree with you saying that it's reducing human beings to their parts. It's a form of, for lack of a better term, it's a form of entertainment. I'm not looking at the porn and saying, oh, that's all that person is. It's just the person having sex with another person, right? This is a person who chose to do this, ideally for fair compensation. And if not, then it's completely unethical and immoral. That is more of a concern to me, how it's recorded and what kind it is. That's more important to me than, just the idea that it's recorded sex. I don't really find it tasteful myself. I don't really enjoy watching porn. It's never done much for me because I don't personally care about the people in it, and I don't seem to need it. But I would argue that it's not inherently bad to watch it anyway. It's more about the context, I think, than anything. And I also think it's kind of weird. People who seem to think it's incredibly immoral and terrible, in my experience growing up in a very conservative and Christian community, it seems like they actually struggle with it more because they think it's bad, which is a weird phenomenon. So I'm an atheist now. And other people that I've talked to who are not religious, they don't really seem to have a problem with it. It's relatively easy for them to be like, oh yeah, like if I don't want to watch porn, I just don't watch porn. Christians will talk about addiction all the time. When they go and ask for prayer in groups with, like with men, like male groups asking for prayer, it's very commonly about porn addiction and stuff. And I read this article. I don't know if it's true because I never fact checked it, but it was about when there are Christian conventions in town, hotels tend to record more adult pay-per-view videos being purchased than otherwise. So I think in a weird way, this kind of idea that it's unacceptable ironically backfires and makes people more likely to do it. What do you think about that? Have you ever had observed anything in life that lines up with that?
It's difficult to say because I wasn't raised very religious, and I'm not super religious even to this day. I do dabble in the Christian community. I go to church every now and then. But certainly I don't know. I'm not in the circle enough to really have a say in that. What I might say though, there was a few interesting points you made. I wish I had written them all down, but the last one we'll just go with that. Well, first of all, by the way, I don't think anyone who watches porn is a bad person. Just to clarify my thoughts, I have, by the way. So I'm not. This is not me being like some kind of. Not that you were accusing me of it, but I do want to clarify, just for my own sake, that this is not like Caesar looking down on a crowd kind of situation.
Yeah,
I'm not
totally.
judging. I'm not saying like, oh, I'm this morally enlightened one. I'm not saying that at all. We are all imperfect people. And we all have moral flaws. Every single person on planet Earth has moral flaws. Me, you, everybody.
Yes.
And porn is just one common moral flaw that a lot of people have, but it is still a moral flaw. As to your other, that was just a clarification. As to your point about Christians, I mean, a couple things. For one, they people can recognize how bad something is even more when either they've suffered through it or they're currently suffering through it. So someone who is like, especially a Christian. So a Christian, someone who's religious will definitely think porn is wrong more than someone who is secular. I mean, exceptions, sure, but I mean, someone who really believes in the Bible or believes in Christian theology, or really any religious theology, Islamic as well, are likely to think porn is immoral, but they might still suffer from addictions from it. And they feel it. They feel it in their heart that what they're doing is wrong. And so they could speak out against it while still suffering from it. And it could be a form of hypocrisy depending on how they're saying it. But it doesn't necessarily surprise me that some of the most vocal people, some of the most vocal people about like the immorality of porn are themselves either have been addicted or maybe still are. That's how they know it's so bad. And maybe, there's a possibility that they just don't want other people like, oh my god, this is the worst feeling ever and I can't stop. This is evil. I really don't. I want to send the message out into the world, into my country, that this is an evil thing, even though I'm doing it. Maybe especially because I'm doing it, because I don't want this to happen to other people. I don't know. It's just a thought. I don't like to just jump right into they're just being hypocrites thing, because I don't. Some are, for sure, but a lot, I think, just have really felt it, and they know it.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense, but what I would say is interesting about it is the fact that it's the people who have those belief systems. It's not necessarily that the correlation is, or that the direction of causality goes, they suffer from it more, therefore they talk about it more. It seems like they believe that it's wrong more and then suffer from it more. That's what it seems like is more the case to me, because it seems like it's religious people who struggle with it specifically, and that doesn't really make sense to me unless there's some kind of ironic, like weird, like backfiring effect. Now, regarding it being
Wait,
right or wrong,
can I ask you to clarify? Oh, sorry. Can I ask you to
go for
clarify
it.
really quick?
Yeah.
Do you mean when you say they suffer from it more? You don't mean that they like? Are you implying that they watch it more, or just that they feel more guilt, and they feel more suffering than someone who doesn't have that moral value because they're secular and so they don't think it's a moral flaw?
Yeah, so in my experience talking to people, which is relatively small, I haven't talked to, a massive sample size of people about this, but in my experiences talking to people, it seems like the religious people have more difficulty not watching porn if they choose not to watch it, and they watch it more, and they also have a harder time stopping. And I used to be a Christian, so when I was a teenager, in my late teens, is when I stopped being religious, and a weird thing happened when I thought, oh, porn is immoral. It was hard for me to stop. I had this thing where I would like log how often I would watch porn. I'd be like, I need to reduce this. It needs to be. I need to like break this bad habit. Like, Jesus, please heal me and all of that. Right? Please like forgive me for this sin and heal me from this infliction of like, the enemy's trying to force me to watch porn and all of this. When I became an atheist, it actually became very easy to stop. I was like, oh, this is completely neutral, and I don't really care either way. And once that happened, I actually didn't really have a problem not watching it. Like, the last time I watched a porn video was easily more than a month ago. I can't even remember when it last was. It was a very long time ago because I genuinely don't care that much. It was only when I was like, oh, this is wrong, that it was actually hard. And I'd like to talk also. So I'm going to give you a chance to respond to that, and then afterward, I'd like to talk about the idea that it's just unethical in all circumstances. Period. If we can come back to that.
Yeah, I think what we'll do is we'll make that our closing statements if I'm getting our timing correctly. And then yeah, but go on with what you were about to say.
Oh, so I was just saying.
The unethical thing I meant.
Yeah. Well, I was gonna just say that I think it depends on how you view sex. If you think it's inherently sacred or not. So I'd like to get your take on both of those topics.
Yeah, I absolutely. I think it is. But whether it literally is or not, I think is almost irrelevant. Because I kind of identify more or less as a secular Christian, and so I like to live as though Christianity is true. I consider Jesus my teacher, and I think the ethics that brought is what created the civilization, and I've reject what's happened when we've lost it. And so the kind of Christian view of morality regarding sexuality and sex is a much more compelling one, that one man, one woman have joined together in this bond, blessed by God himself, and that this is the act that is pure connection. It leads to the family unit, and it's this beautiful thing that you only do with one other person. That's a very nice idea. And just when we kind of reduce sex to this just purely physical act, and we watch others do it, and we pretend, you get my point. It's like I find it all very repulsive. There's something inside me, and I feel this also whenever I watch porn, that there's something inside me that just feels it's wrong, and I can't help feeling like everyone does on some level. And I almost wonder where that comes from. To me, this is one of the... We're not going to get into this right now, don't get me wrong, so I'm not changing topics, but it almost is a compelling evidence for there being some kind of a God, because otherwise why would we feel that? We're just animals in the other sense. So if I were adopting your worldview, which is more atheistic and naturalistic, it's really hard to argue sex is super sacred, because it really is just kind of the reproductive act. That's essentially what it is. But we're intelligent enough beings that we can essentially make more of it, because we can take more pleasure in it because of our vastly increased sentience. So it's really difficult. There's not a real easy answer, and I want to hear you respond to that. But just remind me before I forget, your previous sentiments. I had two responses to those. But if you have something you want to say to that, feel free.
Yeah, no, I'd love to. So here's what I would posit after what I've read in moral psychology, regarding your perception that it's wrong, and an unexplainable sense that it's wrong. On some level, it's a disgust response, and it's well known that one's sensitivity to disgust strongly dictates their moral attitudes, and it will push them more in the direction of traditional, conservative and religious perspectives. Sexual attitudes are actually, surprisingly, which is why this is an interesting topic to begin with, sexual attitudes are very strongly related to your general disgust sensitivity and your general conservative views. it seems weird to me on the surface that sex would be so pivotal in people's worldviews, but it really, really is, and that's why people part of why people love to talk about it so much, I think. But it's this disgust response from seeing other people doing the act, and that's actually explainable evolutionarily. To have a disgust response from seeing other people do it, it's supposed to be private, right? Whether or not you consider it sacred, it's supposed to be completely personal. And as an atheist, won't use the term sacred, but I will absolutely say personal. And there's something kind of beautiful and important about it being, intimacy. It's unique, and it's just you and that other person, and it's nobody else's business. I think that's a beautiful sentiment. That doesn't mean that I think that, seeing porn on the internet is inherently immoral, but I would definitely say that it's not preferable. I won't make the argument that it's for the best overall. There is some aspect of it where people can kind of, outside of a relationship, if they happen to be single, kind of gain ideas on what they like more, like in a kind of exploratory sense. Although that also comes with a caveat that since it's not a natural experience, it could be altering psychology in a way that we didn't evolve to handle. And then what was the other point you make? You made? I think I missed something that you said.
Um, I don't know. I think you basically touched on all the key points I made, unless I missed some. So I do think, if you think of it though, feel free to cut me off, because I get it. Sometimes it comes to you a little later. So if it does, just let me know. I think those are valid points, and I can't really say I think you're wrong, because I don't know. For all I know, you're right. Who knows? So it's difficult to say. But I did want to, if you're okay, if you'll allow me, there was two things I wanted to say, which is that, and I'll make these quick because I know we're running out of time. About Christians versus or religious versus non-religious people and their relationship to porn. Um, I would need to see the data saying that religious people watch it more, but I am willing, for the sake of argument, to accept that that could be true to some degree. I'd imagine they're pretty similar, but I'm willing to accept, for the sake of argument, that maybe religious people watch it a little more. I think part of the reason that could be is the same reason why, like when you were, I don't know if your parents, I mean, yeah, you were raised Christian. So my parents were the same, though, despite the fact that we were not Christian. That R-rated movies were so much more appealing, and I wanted to watch them so much more because I wasn't allowed to watch them because
Yes.
they were, wrong or whatever. So I do think it kind of triggers that part of your brain, because I guarantee you, if it was just like we could watch whatever movie we wanted all the time, it wouldn't have that vibe. I wouldn't specifically be like, oh, I gotta watch Pulp Fiction. The whole reason I wanted to watch Pulp Fiction when I was young was because my mom told me I couldn't and said, no, you're never gonna watch this. It's never gonna happen. No way. And I'm like, oh, I gotta watch it. So I think that has something to do with it. But I think the slightly more interesting point is that why Christians are more disgusted with it, or more they struggle with it more. That was what I meant to say. Why do they struggle with it more? I think it's because I mean, it's obvious, because they've been raised to believe it's wrong, and they have a moral authority that says it's wrong. And so, whether it's because, I mean, I can't help feeling like that instinct is there for a reason, and I don't think it's just because of conditioning, because you could say it is, because that's how they were raised, and they were raised to believe that these things are wrong because God says they're wrong. Or it could be that there is some kind of underlying spiritual reason why it's wrong. Like, kind of like what came first, chicken or the egg kind of thing. Was it because people created religion that said it wrong? Or did people discover religion and God's will because he put it in us, in our hearts, that it's wrong? I don't know. It's a hard question.
Yeah.
I know which one I want to. I'm going to live my life as if it's true. That's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a really good angle to take. It's a chicken and an egg problem. And I think that what came first was just the general sense of disgust. I think religion is kind of an extremely formalized and ritualized way of dealing with our moral emotions, hugely disgust. And that's kind of where it initially came from. It's not it's not something that I would consider ideal or for the better in the end. So it's a valid instinct, in my opinion. Okay, so that was that. I think that concludes that topic. Now I'd like to move on to the topic of romance and human connection in 2023. So I have this perspective right now that romance is largely dead, that we are very superficial in the modern era, and it's largely because of comfort and instant gratification that makes us not want to invest in deeply into another person. And this idea, it's kind of a vicious cycle. It's like the more you can't really trust your partner to be someone who's worthy of long term commitment, the less likely you will be better off wanting long term commitment. And so it's kind of a cycle that causes, um, just an erosion of trust. And I think people are more superficial today than ever before. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, people are more superficial today than ever before. That's for sure. I think you could make a lot of criticisms about people back in the day. Obviously, I mean, if you read any history book or any time period, I mean, morals were not as good as they are now. Uh, like slavery used to be the norm, just as a cliche example. I mean, that used to be just the norm. So it's crazy to think about that. But one thing you can definitely say has degraded is, yeah, I mean, yeah, how superficial people are. The causes of it are numerous. We've talked before about internet, social media, and things like that. I think those kind of things have turned our watching spending so many hours a day watching screens, for example, has almost as a collective turned our brains to mush, and our attention spans are now like similar to that of like an ant. And I think everything came from that, honestly, like the need for instant gratification and the lack of commitment and the death of romance kind of all followed. I mean, even think about dating apps and like hookup culture. That didn't exist before the internet and before we had all these little screens in our hands. And it's so ironic too, because we have all the information. We live in the age of information. We have all the information we could ever need at our fingertips with our phones, and we don't even really use it for good. We just, we just use it for our own, petty things. And I don't know. It's going to be a weird experiment to see, because this is the first generation where this has really happened. So it'll be interesting to see the long term effects of this. I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that to a very large degree. It's weird to me the amount of power people have and they just don't use it. There's so much that you can do with an average $100 $200 laptop. You can get something used and do just you can do things that the brilliant minds of 200 years ago could only dream of being able to do. And it's especially with AI and all of that, it's really incredible, and a lot of people just don't utilize it. And I think in some ways in the modern era, largely thanks to the internet, we've gotten more ethical. You brought up slavery as an example, and I think that one of the ways that we're more ethical today is that we don't tolerate brutality and suffering quite as much as we used to, which is partly based on what I'll call our convenience culture. So that's good. We don't seem to tolerate power indifferences quite as much as we used to. However, in this convenience culture, we also don't really have much of a concept of investment, and there's a true beauty to investing in another human being that I think has been lost, and it's very sad. I don't know what the real solution to it is. It seems to me that Gen Z is kind of starting to wake up to the idea that this is a problem, and it seems like it's been a problem for a long time. I mean, people in the 80s and the 90s, and from what I'm aware of, I don't know if it was more or less than today, but there's definitely a hookup culture then of some kind. Um, and
Oh, sure.
prior to that, to some degree, of course, you could say, you know, at every stage in human history, there was something along those lines. But I do think it's stronger today than it has been in the past. And I think people are just so incredibly lonely, and that also is a similar topic. Friendship is even declining, for God's sakes. It's crazy. Friendship is declining so much. People have, I don't remember exactly what the statistic was. I think it was like half the close friends as people did in the 90s today.
Yeah, I buy it.
I would too,
Yeah, I buy
100%.
it. It really feels that way. Uh, it's a real problem. It's a real problem. And I also, I mean, this is not like, I mean, unlike the porn thing, which I think I presented a couple pretty easy to enact solutions. I would really say those would help both with like preventing kids from watching it and help the overall decrease of it. Because just because people wouldn't want their information online, at least those are two solutions that are pretty practical and easy to apply, and I think would be effective. But with this, it's like, yeah, I'm not 100% sure. I mean, obviously we're not going to go the authoritarian route and just ban these things because we have to have a free society.
Yeah, and that's not
But
going to
on
happen
the other
either.
hand, I think, yeah, you're right. It wouldn't work. But the point is though that it has to be from within, and I think a good place to start would be to for parents have to make the right decisions to make sure their kids are not looking at screens all day. And this is a huge irresponsible parenting is a huge problem. I personally know parents, a lot of them who let their little kids have tablets and iPhones and things like that, and they say, "Yeah, go look at the TV, go look at your phone, go do whatever you want." They're not really present in their kids' lives, and they need to be. They need to be stern and strict and say, "No, you're not." If you like, maybe give them like a flip phone. Sorry, give them like a flip phone or something that they can only use essentially to make calls for emergency reasons. But other than that, make sure that they're playing outside, going for hikes, and reading books, like actual physical books. These are the things that I think would solve the problem. These would be you'd be raising your kids healthy, and if you raise your kids like that, I would be shocked if they turned out to be the kind of kids when they get a little older that would the kind of people when they get a little older that they would be obsessed with hookup culture and instant gratification. I'd be really surprised, Josh.
Yeah, I would say that would definitely help. And I've never been into hookup culture. Been, I have always had a very deep craving for romance, and not really wanted much outside of that, um, or at least not to have physical relations with women outside of a romantic context. That's not really been something that I've found particularly appealing. I just don't see a point in being that close to a stranger. And I grew up with a dumb phone, as I like to call it. It was this. It had no touchscreen. It just had like this physical keypad. This was back when I'm Gen Z, so iPhones had been out for a very long time, and most of my peers had smartphones. I had a dumb phone until I was about 20 ish. I didn't see a point in buying one even for a while, but it I would say it helped. I wasn't able to use the internet until I was about 14, and I really think that was good for my brain. I think it helped me socially, and I would not have been able to develop the skills and even the intellectual skills that I developed if I hadn't had that kind of delay. I used to learn things from books. I taught myself software engineering from a book, and I got really good at it when I was a teenager. And on the internet, there's just a billion tiny pieces of information that you have to search for. And like, yes, it's very powerful, but everything is this tiny bite-sized thing that has low quality, and that's really what our lives have become in every way. I think not like one big high-quality thing. I mean, books essentially are in some way analogous to a relationship versus if you read a little listicle online. That's like a short-term low-quality thing, whereas a book is a long-term high-quality thing, which is what relationships are versus hookups. So I think that's very related, but just the whole concept of investing time into something meaningful on a larger scale. And I also believe that the solution has to be some kind of spiritual transformation in society. So I'm not religious, and I don't agree with everything Jordan Peterson has said. I disagree with him on a lot of takes. But one thing he said that really struck me one time, I was watching his lectures on YouTube, which I like. He had a lot of really good psychology lectures. Um, One thing he said that just kind of stunned me was he said, when you take out a sophisticated religious structure in a society, an unsophisticated one will rise to take its place. As much as I don't particularly like Christianity, I have to say humans have some kind of need for something akin to a religious structure. I myself lean a little bit more toward Buddhism, maybe something adjacent to secular Buddhism. Um, I think we need something. And people losing Christianity creates a sudden lack of wisdom. It's an incredible increase in social and cultural evolution that's positive in a lot of ways because there's a lot of bad in religion too. But we currently need to find something else. And I think we're currently trying to grapple with that problem in society and trying to figure out what to replace it with.
I think that was really articulate and well said. I agree with everything you just said. I love the book analogy. I hadn't even thought about that. That's a really interesting analogy, comparing the book to the bite-sized pieces on the internet, and the and the how it's analogous to relationships. That was interesting. I really like that. I think you're correct about the spiritual. Obviously, you know me. I'm more of a spiritual guy than you, so that was music to my ears. I agree completely. That is, I think, the lack of religion, because I mean we do live in a vastly secular society now, and I think it has bred despair. That's what I believe, and I think
Yeah,
everything that we've talked about, both in this podcast and the last, has bred from that problem is despair. People see no hope, and if you have hope, then committing to things and to people into your work and to your projects, that's easy to do because you have some kind of purpose. You feel the purpose, and when you feel despair, you have no purpose and you have no hope, and that's what leads to things like porn addiction and hookup culture and just moral decay in general. It all, I think it comes from that. I really do believe that, and I do think absolutely a spiritual awakening and comeback is, whether it exists or not, is almost irrelevant. I think that's
yeah,
kind of the point you're trying to make, is that's almost irrelevant. We still need it. And I agree with Peterson's sentiment 100%. I don't think Buddhism's going to cut it because that's essentially just an atheist worldview. It essentially is. It's a little vague. It's a really nice philosophy. I'm not dissing Buddhism or anything. I've met a lot of really cool Buddhists. My Aunt Sarah was a Buddhist, and she was just awesome. One of my favorite people. Um, but I think Christianity is more of this kind of rigid, kind of like, you have a really concrete figure, and you have a really, you know what I mean? So there's something real structural about it. You know what I mean? It's not just, it's a bit more than just a philosophy. There is something truly spiritual about it. And so it doesn't necessarily have to be Christianity, but like you said, it has to be something.
yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I don't think Buddhism itself is enough to replace Christianity in our culture. I don't see the thing about Buddhism is it has many different schools, and it depends on kind of what school you're in, what your specific views are, um, and it doesn't really push itself into every single aspect of your life forcefully the way Christianity does. I'd say Christianity is a little bit thicker, for lack of a better term, of a religion than Buddhism. But it's a remarkably good framework. It's a good framework for wisdom and for just a general perspective on life, and that's something that people need really badly. So I think it offers a lot of value in that, and kind of I'd like to talk about nihilism in our culture. People on the right and the left both get it wrong, in my opinion. On the right, they'll have a little bit of a moral panic. They'll say, "Oh, without Christianity, we're doomed to be nihilistic forever." Whereas on the left, people say, "No, this is how things are supposed to be." Christianity is a mind virus, assuming that the people on the left are not religious, which plenty of them are. I'm kind of being stereotypical here, but you know what I mean. Um, but saying no, Christianity is mind virus. This is true progress. This is all we need in society. They're both missing the point. The point is we live in a different world now than we used to, and we don't have less of a need for some kind of spiritual framework as human beings. It's in our hierarchy of needs, in my opinion, to have some kind of spiritual framework of the world, and Christianity will not cut it anymore. In the modern era, we just don't have as much of a need for that. So we need something, and I believe that human beings naturally will evolve over time to have whatever spiritual framework they need. We look all throughout history; our perspectives have been evolving since our species began. You know, it's not like we're incapable of coming up with something reasonable to fill its place, and it's probably going to be something relatively unique and new that we haven't seen before. It's probably going to be a fusion of Christianity and a lot of other elements. Um, and one thing I kind of want to do with this podcast is explore that. It was inspired by, uh, for me, when I first thought of the podcast, I wanted to talk about some ancient Greek ideas. The ancient Greeks had a lot of really fascinating thoughts, and a lot of our modern ideas in our culture today come from them. A lot of Christians will say, "Oh, it's Judeo-Christian values that have driven our nation for ages." A lot of it is ancient Greek ideas and Enlightenment values. It's really a fusion of many different things. It's not as pure of a Judeo-Christian culture as people who are in that camp like to believe. If you look at the history of our thoughts, we're really not purely Judeo-Christian at all. We're just strongly influenced by it. And I think that if there's a lot of different sources in the past that we can go to try to figure out what framework would be good for today.
Yeah, I mean, very strongly influenced, but you're not wrong. I think so. It sounds to me like you agree more with conservatives, though. So you disagree with the specifics about Christianity, but you do actually agree with their sentiment, and you actually disagree with the left sentiment. Well, like you said, I don't want to stereotype either. I'm not trying to say all of them, but the secular. You know what I'll say? I'll say progressives.
Sure.
I'm not. I'm not saying they're bad people, but they do have this idea. I get into this discussion with some relatives sometimes about secular humanism, for example, like that big enough. And a lot of back when I used to be more atheist and I listened to some atheist influencers, they talked about secular humanism all the time. Like, oh, that's the moral. That's all we need. We don't need religious values.
Yeah.
But without getting into anything specific, because I don't want to get off topic or anything, I think that's failed us. I think that's failed us in a really spectacular way. And it's difficult for me to come to grips with it just being a coincidence. Like, why? This will be a topic for another time, but why is it that we need something spiritual? Why is it that we need something that's transcendent of just the natural world and our natural human instincts? Why is it? And you might make an argument from evolution, and I might say there's something more to the equation. I'm not sure. But either way, we're in agreement that we need it. Because without it, we're lost. And it's clearly bred it has an epidemic, a pandemic of despair. And so, yeah, who knows what it'll end up being. You're right. Maybe we just ditch. If you want to know my prediction, so you gave your prediction, which is I mean, to be fair, it'll be you're talking about something very long term. So it'll outlive us. It'll outlive our grandchildren. Something that's going to replace Christianity, that's spiritual. And that's going to be more of like a long term thing. So there's no way you and I are going to be able to tell if that's going to happen. In the more short term, I see a resurgence in traditional values, and I see Christianity making. This is my prediction, and within my lifetime too, within our lifetimes, I see Christianity making a big comeback. And I mean like the true Christianity, the one, because I know you mentioned that some progressives or liberals are religious. I mean, yeah, kind of, but not really. I mean, all their values are secular. They don't read the Bible. They don't get their values from the Bible. Because let's just be honest, if they did, they would not be liberal. Whether you think that's a good or a bad thing is totally up to you. I'm not even making a comment on that. I'm just saying, though, they would not be. They would not. I mean, the whole point of conservatism is they are conserving Christian values. That's what they're doing. And so, but the point I'm trying to make is that that I see a resurgence in those. I see a resurgence. I really do. I see a comeback in the making.
It might happen. I think it's going to be bits and pieces picked out of Christianity with a lot of it left behind. That's already happened. We don't really follow the Bible to the letter at all today. We've already kind of decided what to get rid of, and that's what a lot of true, especially fundamentalist Christians will take issue with in modern Christianities. They'll say you're just cherry picking the Bible. And I just think that's going to happen more. I think it's going to become more accepted. Right now, the left, or I should say, progressives, those types of people, tend to try to attack anything that's Christian. I think the resurgence is more going to happen just that those attacks will kind of die down a little bit. Once Christianity has less power in society, it won't be seen as much of a threat. the job of the left is to get rid of what we don't need anymore. Typically, like that's psychologically what they're built for. The job of the right is to protect what we do still need. Psychologically, that's I could talk about personality psychology, but that's literally what kind of decides if you're a right winger or a left winger. It's largely just based on your personality traits in your brain. And there's been numerous studies to confirm this. I think there's going to be kind of a cultural shift that focuses less on cutting away and stripping back and more on building up. And that's when Christianity is going to have a little bit of resurgence. Um, but yeah, and we do need something more. It's one of my favorite philosophers, David Hume. He said, reason is not only to be slave to the passions. For years, man, years, people have thought, oh, you can get your morals from logic. It's not true. And this has been kind of echoed in other fields, even machine learning, with things called the orthogonality thesis. Logic and intelligence really cannot determine a goal. All they are tools to reach a goal. As human beings, we need some kind of goal. Nihilism is a lack of a goal, and we have despair because we want a goal. Lack of a goal makes us feel awful. And so our default fallback is to find a goal, i.e., find a purpose. We're not built to not have a purpose. Even our perceptions of the world, our visual perceptions, our auditory perceptions, they revolve. There's been demonstrations of this. They are influenced by what we want. We don't see the whole picture. We only see what relates to what we want, and we don't have something to want. It's just turmoil. We're in turmoil, and we need something much bigger than secular humanism. Because I used to be in that camp too. When I first became an atheist, that's immediately where I went with secular humanism, and I agree, it's not enough. You need something much bigger because you say, okay, I have this goal. You're like, okay, why? Well, because of this. Okay, why? You need a thorough enough moral and spiritual framework as a human being to answer enough whys, and that's what I think is really what it takes and what defines whether something is going to be good or not.
Yeah, I think I agree with basically everything you just said. I might adjust one thing though, because I think it's less about want. I think want and purpose are actually not synonyms, and they're actually different. I actually think that when people pursue what they want, quote unquote, that's what breeds despair, and because that might be different than a purpose. So, like, even a good husband and father, for example, might want, something. He might want to have sex with someone else. He might see someone he's physically attracted to. He just happens to glance and just want it because it's just his natural inclination. But that's not his purpose. His purpose is to be faithful and to raise his kids and be a good husband, and that's his purpose. It's not his want. And that's actually what breeds true happiness, is that there's a great film by Martin Scorsese, by the way, called The Age of Innocence, which is also based on a great book too, which is kind of deals with this very thing, that what is true happiness? What brings you true happiness? It's actually not pursuing something you want. It's pursuing something more. It's pursuing something better than just a simple want. It's not about me anymore. It's about my wife. It's about my kids. That's what it's about. It's not about me and my happiness and my wants. And that will lead to true happiness.
Yeah, that's an
And
incredibly
I think
good
we're
point.
lacking that in society.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think we're lacking it very much, and we need that. So some things can have to come and take its place one way or another. There's just no like, if your needs are not being met, you will find a way to meet your needs, whether it's in a healthy way or not a healthy way. So one way or another, society is going to find something, and as far as the purpose goes, it's just a deeper substrate of desire in the human soul. I think, we have these superficial desires, and there's been different attempts to divide up the psyche into different units, like Freud's ego, superego, and id. I just think we need some kind of deeper desire to orchestrate our smaller term desires, because we're built to try to think about something long term. Life is just not satisfying if you don't have anything to truly look forward to after tomorrow or the next week or the next month. So, okay, with that, I think that's a pretty good stopping point for that topic. I'd like to kind of talk about the way they relate to each other because I think they're very much connected. What do you think?
Yeah, I completely agree. They're totally connected. I think they're more connected than I even would have thought initially after having this discussion because the whole point we were bringing up about pornography and the death of romance is that it both comes from despair and a lack of real purpose in any kind of substantive way. Because when you don't have that purpose, that driving force, that transcendent purpose, that is, I think you and I both agree, funny enough, is spiritual in nature, then we're lost and nihilistic, and that's everything else comes from that. The death of romance, the rise of hookup culture, the addiction to porn, it all comes from that lack of a transcendent meaningful purpose in life, that you just feel there's no hope, and so you just pursue these short-term goals that are superficial and sometimes even immoral, and it's a really self-defeating cycle, and that's why we need that resurgence and that spiritual awakening in our society. That's how I would say they relate. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you, and I think it's important to kind of touch on human connection a little bit more because we kind of went more in a very general, abstract direction with that discussion. I think the whole thing with porn has a lot to do with human connection, and that's why it's considered sacred by people, is because it's supposed to be about two people, only two people, connecting deeply with one another. And that's kind of, ideally the highest form of connection. And in our society, when we're more nihilistic, we also are less trusting of each other. And without some kind of common framework from one person to the next, it's like, because, if I go and I try to date someone, it's like they could have any number of values, any number of things. It's like the odds of us being compatible in our worldview, I think, is lower today than it has been in the past. It feels like the odds that I can trust that person are lower than I probably would have felt in the past as well. And I think that's related to us needing some kind of higher sense of purpose, to really be willing to jump off that cliff and embrace romance. You know?
Yeah, because if we don't have that higher purpose, then what's really the point? And that's why it's funny is like even if there is no higher purpose, we still have to act as though there is one. We still
Yeah.
have to live our lives as though there's one because like we don't have an alternative. So even if someone says like there are more nihilistic atheists, and to some degree I almost respect them. I don't want to say I respect them more, but I can almost respect the honesty, the bluntness. Like hey, there is no God, so there is no higher purpose. So just pursue what you want. They do exist. I'm not saying it's the majority of atheists, obviously. Obviously, you're not like that, but I can't help but understand their logic. Because yeah, to some degree, I on a logical level, I kind of agree. It's like okay, there is no God, there is no soul, we're just material. There is no, then yeah, by that, if you follow that to its logical end, there is no higher purpose. So whether that's true or not, we need to act as though it's not. Okay, I don't even care. We need to. There is a higher power. There is a higher purpose. Without that belief, without that anchor, we're lost, and it will breed a nihilistic society that is ripe with despair, which is exactly what we see. And this is why I don't think it's sustainable, which is why it's not a sustainable system we have right now. It is not. And this is why I don't see any alternative besides a total resurgence of traditional values and Christian belief. That's my prediction. I hope it's true, but I don't know. We'll have to stay tuned.
Yep, we will. I feel like it's interesting because today there's been such anger against the existing systems, which is understandable from my point of view. I think Christianity really, in a lot of ways, has been very toxic in our society. I don't think in every way, but I see it. I see at least the kind of more literal and traditional interpretations of Christianity as not being particularly auspicious in the modern era. But at the same time, it's like people get very angry if you support even the good parts of it. And that, I think, is starting to fade. So we will see something happen that kind of is more lenient toward the traditional perspectives one way or another, whether it's fully embracing them or not. I think it doesn't have to be on a, we don't have to literally believe in a higher power. That's my perspective. I think psychology and philosophy and just the acknowledgement of what our deeper needs are is enough to build what we need to build. And I hope that's the case. I hope that's true. I
Yeah, but
think,
to some degree, it's like we won't know.
yeah, we won't. But I think even
We'll
just
have to find out.
we will. I think even the acknowledgement that we need more human connection in and of itself will help a lot. Um, because that is a big part of our deeper needs, in my opinion. It's just the need to have connection with other human beings. And I think in a lot of ways, loneliness and nihilism are very connected.
They absolutely are. Like 100% they are.
Yeah.
If you're not a lonely person, I don't think you're going to be nihilistic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, because your purpose becomes the connections in your life.
I mean, that is the purpose, in my opinion, is other connection. Because, like, every other purpose, quote unquote, is a superficial purpose. Like, if you think about the life that Jordan Belfort led, like, for example, people dismiss Wolf of Wall Street, for example, as just being kind of like a, whatever, kind of like a funny movie or whatever. But it's actually pretty deep because the whole point is all the money and all the sex and all the pleasurable things in the world, he had them all. Like, he had everything, but he had nothing. So I think that's kind
Yeah.
of an interesting thing because really at the end of the day, it's our connections with people that give us our purpose, like real, honest connections. And at the end, I know this is just gonna end up becoming a gimmick where I just compare everything to films I like, but because it's what can I say? I'm the film guy. At the end of that movie, you found out the one thing he really cared about was his kids, because she told him she was taking his kids away, and he lost it. And why would he lose it? Well, I was like, oh, I got my money, I got my cocaine, I got. No, it's like he lost it because at the end of the day, that's what mattered.
Yeah.
I think it's a beautiful thing. I don't know why I thought of that movie of all movies, but I don't know. I think with Killers
It's
of the Flower Moon coming out, I'm thinking a lot about Martin Scorsese.
yeah. Well, it's pertinent. I think it's actually a really good illustration of the idea. So, yeah. Well, I think that concludes those topics for today. Thank you so much, and thank you all so much for tuning in. I have been Josh, and this has been Joseph. You all have a wonderful week, and be sure to tune in next time for another Perfect Thursday.